Hello and welcome back to The Stories That Brought You Here. It's the podcast dedicated to the stories of the people from Pender Island, British Columbia. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Wakaluk, and I'll be sitting down in one-on-one, hour-long conversations with current Pender Island residents to hear the stories that brought them to this tasty little island we live on, and to also hear the stories that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. Today, I'll be speaking with Joe Down. Now, if you know Joe like I know Joe, then you're going to know him as that guy who owns Joe's Place, that restaurant at the Driftwood Center. Well, today we're going to get to hear Joe talk a little bit about that and a whole bunch of other things, including his love of basketball while he was growing up in Sidney, just across the water from here. We're going to get to hear him describe how he met his wife, Alex. We'll get to hear Joe talk about some travel stories from his past, and we're also going to get to hear Joe speak at length about an incident that happened in 2011 where his son was diagnosed with a very serious illness. And Joe will describe how the community came to rally around him and his family in a very significant way. All that is on the menu. Plus, we have some below average audio quality on this interview because I was using a new mic for this interview for the very first time, and it seems as if I did not set the audio levels properly because I'm still working through the kinks on how to use this mic properly. It's been driving me nuts in post-production to try to round out the sound. It sounds more echoey than usual, quite a bit more. If you've listened to previous podcasts, I think you'll be able to tell the difference. If you have not listened to a podcast before, trust me, it does not usually sound like this. My apologies to Joe, my apologies to you, the listener. But now that I got that off my chest, it doesn't change the fact that it's still a great interview with an amazing guy. So without further ado, here is my interview with Joe Down. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad that I got up the courage to finally say yes and come and chat.
Yeah, me too. Like we've been trying to do this for maybe like a month now or so, and there's a power outage today that made it a little bit difficult. We're supposed to be doing this at 10 a.m. this morning, but
I know we originally there was a little bobbing and weaving going on as I built up confidence, and then the power outage today was another like, oh, maybe I can use the power outage to get around doing this because I was getting a little bit gun shy. But my wife encouraged me that you should go and have a chat, and you got some interesting things to say. So, and more often than not, she's correct.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you here. Thanks for coming in on this rainy Thursday afternoon. There we go. All right. Well, let's jump into the traditional first question of this podcast, and that is, what brought you to Pender Island?
Well, I woke up one morning. My wife was crying beside me, and I looked over to her, and she was almost inconsolable. She was just so upset and so distraught. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "I'm pregnant." I said, and I remember chuckling just like that, thinking and saying, "That's not so bad. We're fine." But and the truth is that we had just got back from England, and we were struggling financially, and even though I was working at a great job with a great company, I was very middle management, and the thought and the prospect of having another mouth to feed was a little bit scary, and I needed to really figure out a way to create more revenue to feed my new baby that was on the way. We initially weren't really sure whether we were going to have a family or not. I mean, we really had to talk about it for a few days, but eventually we realized that, it's the right thing to do. I remember specifically driving up the Pape Highway, driving by the driving range, thinking about a very small person holding my hand, and I sort of burst into tears while I was driving up the highway. And I still remember that moment. And that was the moment I knew that I was going to be a dad and that we're absolutely going to have a family. We were in a situation where we were living in a loft of a house right on Fairfield and Quadra in Victoria. And I was working at Milestones on the Inner Harbor, just a few minutes walk away. It was nice. I mean, the people I worked with were really great, and I got to meet clientele from all over the world, which is one of the reasons I love hospitality. But I was very middle management. I had to wear a tie every day and a vest every day, and I used to wander to work cursing and swearing because I hate wearing ties and I hate being that all pent up. And it wasn't a position that I was going to stay at very long because I like to be in charge. I like to be the guy running the restaurant. I decided to look into my junk mail folder and my trash in my Hotmail account because there was an email that was sent to me 3 or 4 months earlier when we had just arrived home from England. And it was from a lady, a local lady on Pender Island, who said to me that there is a pub and a resort on Pender Island that was looking for someone to be the bar manager or a head bartender or something along those lines. And initially, when I got that email, even though we were struggling financially and I couldn't seem to pick up a job in Victoria, even though I knew everybody, even though I couldn't find a job, my initial response to that email was, there's no way in heck I'm going to move to Pender Island. I was certain that Pender Island was basically for yoga instructors or artists, or doesn't everybody just smoke pot on Pender Island? Isn't that what the island's all about? I was so naive. I had no idea what not just Pender Island, but all of the Gulf Islands were about. I grew up in Sidney, and to be that ignorant and that not knowing about such great local communities, I look back now, it's a little bit on the embarrassing side. But I thought, you know what? I dug out that email from my trash folder, and I thought, I'm going to write her back and say, did you end up hiring someone? I'd love to look at the job. So I made an arrangement to Georgina Weber was the lady's name who wrote me the letter. She was a friend of mine from my youth, and she sort of followed my hospitality career. So I wrote her a letter, and she arranged a meeting with the current operators of the Port Browning Marina. And I decided to come over to Pender Island with my wife after having a couple of initial meetings and to check the island out. And we met some of the locals. I met some of the staff. We looked at the view. We looked at the accommodation. It was a day much like today. It was raining and miserable and windy, and it wasn't very nice. The Queen of Cumberland was all over the place on the way over. We didn't stay for lunch at the pub. I really just wanted to get back to the ferry because I wasn't really sure about it. And on the way home, I looked at my fiance at the time. I said, "So what do you think?" And she says, "I love it. Let's move over there." And from that moment on, I focused myself on the job. And the job was to dig my feet in and get my hands on this property and do what I can to put it back on the map, basically, for the boaters and the local community. And it was a pub that it needed a little bit of attention. So I loved working there, and I had some great relationships with my staff. I can't say enough about the staff. And obviously the clientele are fantastic. But for the first longest time, I was saying earlier that I was really here just for the job. And I was here to create revenue for a property that really the ownership group wanted it to be sold. But as time went by, I realized that our little boy had been born. The community has sort of embraced us and embraced him. And I realized that this place we had come to had transformed itself into a location for employment to all of a sudden it was turning into our home. And in hindsight, I don't know why it took me 2 or 3 years to come to that realization, because it really was our home right off the bat. I can't imagine living or working or thinking about going anywhere else now. We absolutely love it here. You know, we were immediately embraced and looked after. The first season of Port Browning was obviously an eye-opener. I'd never ran a marina before. I don't camp. I've never camped. I don't believe in it.
You don't believe in camping, really?
No, I would much rather stay in a nice motel or have a porch or something like that. But I slept in a truck once up at Lake Cowichan. I slept on our deck once when we lived in Sidney. And that, for me, that's camping. That's enough. I'm more of a cheap motel, sleeping in a bed accommodation guy. But I have a little boy who wants to go camping, and I have a wife that loves camping, and they've gone on camping trips, but I've yet to go on a camping trip with them. It's such a guilty thing to think about or say. But so I'm 47 now, and soon I'm going to go on a proper camping trip. I have to go on a camping trip.
Okay, Joe, this might blow your mind, but my wife Jennifer and I, we spent about 3 months camping in our yard this summer. Yeah, but we put a mattress out there though, right? We bought a bigger tent and we slept out there. It was addictive. It was hard to sleep inside because it was so nice to be in the fresh air. You can start with your yard though.
Yeah. No, we slept in our spare room a few times this summer and with the window wide open, so that was camping-esque. But when I was raised, my mom and dad, I'm the youngest of 5, it wasn't really something we ever did. We never really went camping. I remember us having a tent once. We lived on 5 acres of land up by the airport in Sidney. And I don't even remember sleeping in the tent. I always remember the end of the play day was done and we would go back into the house. So lots of people are raised lots of different ways, right or wrong. And it just wasn't something that our family did.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, we did other things that were fun as well.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's hear about your parents a little bit and where you were born.
Well, I was born in 1970 in a little village called Ash in the southeast of England in Kent. And it's about 13 miles outside of Sandwich. All of my brothers and sisters and my mom and dad were all born in the same little village. I'm sure if my eldest sister were here right now, she'd correct me if I was incorrect, but I'm pretty sure we were all born at home, like by a midwife.
Wow.
I'm fairly certain that's what I've always believed, so I'm going to say it's right. And my mom and dad were born just down the lane from each other. They've known each other. They knew each other their whole life. In 1975, my dad was in the Royal Air Force, and he was a structural sheet metal worker. He was an aeronautical engineer, and the business was not booming anymore in the southeast of England, and he was looking for new opportunities, and we moved to Canada. I don't remember the decision-making process. I was only 4.5. I know that it was a big step to move 5 children and my mom and dad to Canada. Not a day goes by that I don't thank my parents for that decision. What a wonderful country to bring your children to. I've gone back to England, and England's lovely as well. And there's all kinds of great things about England. I've worked over there, but I mean, what a big risk and what a big leap of faith it was by Dad to decide to come over here, and I'm glad he did. We spent some time in Manitoba. We landed in Winnipeg, spent some time in Gimli, moved up to Thompson. We were in Thompson, Manitoba for 3.5 years. However cold and icy and dry you think it is, it's that. Yeah, and more. I remember walking to school, and it reminds me of that episode where, I used to walk to school in 50 to minus 50. Well, I used to walk to school uphill minus 55, and I could carry on like that because it was darn cold going to school there. But eventually, I think the north of Canada kind of got the better of mom and dad, and we started to move west. And a quick stop in Calgary, and eventually we made our way to Sidney. I'm fairly certain it was 1975 in the summer. For those who know Sidney well, obviously it's developed a lot since 1979. Where the Emerald Isle Hotel or Motel is by Thrifty's in Sidney, there used to be a little motel there called the Cragmile Motel. It was sort of a U-shaped motel. We lived in the motel for our first 6 or 7 months, I think. It might have been longer, might have been shorter. I don't really know because I was still pretty young. But I know that it was only a couple of 100 yards to Sidney Elementary School. So I used to pedal to Sidney Elementary School. My dad got a job working for, I believe it was for Viking Air at the airport. He spent some time with the firemen. But Dad was, he was a Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 5 guy, always had the weekends off. After we lived in the motel, we ended up moving to a little property literally right by, there's a graveyard by the airport, by the runways, right by the control tower on, if anyone knows where Mary's restaurant is or the Air Cadet Hall, there used to be a house on 5.5 acres of land there. We lived there for a while. We sort of bounced around Sidney a little bit. I recall 1, 2, 3, we must have lived in 6 or 7 different houses in Sidney when I grew up.
Oh, wow.
We weren't really much into the move to a house and stay there for years and years and years. Mom and Dad, for whatever reason, they never really told me or us what struggles they went through, but we moved around a little bit. It was not like Dad was in the Army or the Air Force. We weren't, Army brats where we're moving to different parts of the country. But again, right or wrong, I was raised to think that you should never buy a house. And it took me decades and decades to get out of that mindset of Mom and Dad always believe you should always rent a house because you don't want to commit yourself to a mortgage. And it took me forever to realize that, investing in real estate actually is a good thing, So, but I mean, I don't want to critique them on their choices because they provided 5 kids with a great home, and we were never without. We always had and needed what we wanted.
What were your parents' names?
My dad's name was Reginald Francis Down, and my mom was Patricia and Joan Down. Pat and Reg, they were known as.
Pat and Reg,
yeah.
Okay.
Both of my parents, we opened the restaurant in May of 2016. And my dad unexpectedly passed away just before the restaurant opened, a couple of months before the restaurant opened. And my mom had passed away a couple of months before that in Victoria. My mom was ill, and luckily we were able to get the last day and a half, all my brothers and sisters, all of my cousins, all the husbands of the wives and wives of the husbands. We all got to be with Mom for the last day. We were there, and she slowly passed away. So it was if there was ever a way that anyone could pass away peacefully, surrounded by their entire family, Mom got to have that. So, and now they're both planted in a plant pot in my sister's backyard together, and they used to have some pretty ridiculous conversations and fights, Mom and Dad. So I'm sure they're niggling away at each other right now in the plant. So, but, that's why when you come into Joe's place, you'll see things on the menu like bubble and squeak or corned beef hash or full English breakfast, or there's Yorkshire puddings on there because I wanted to pay homage to my parents, basically. There's a picture in one of the corners of a painting they used to have in their living room, to the regular guest. It just looks like a regular picture, but for me and my sisters and my family, it has special meaning to us. So, but they spent a lot of time on Pender Island. They used to come over here and visit really, really often. Our little boy Henry was. We always joke about how he's sort of the golden grandchild and how they loved him the most. I don't want to say that. They loved all the grandchildren equally, but he was the favorite. So, Mom and Dad, we would entertain guests occasionally. We'd have friends that would come from England, or family that would come from England, or Calgary, friends that would come from Calgary. And we would take them on the 5 Island ferry that would go around and go and visit all the islands. But we never get off the ferry and never go visit Pender Island, or never go see Saturna or Galliano. Or we would always look at the Gulf Islands as being just really far away. And then we would always go back home. So when the opportunity came up to come to Pender Island, I used to think back to Mom and Dad's 5 Island ferry rides all the time. And I'd only ever seen Pender Island in passing. I'm like, oh, there's the Pender stop. There's Otter Bay. I guess we're heading back to Swartz Bay now. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you first came to Pender Island with the job opportunity and it all unfolded from there, how was the first few years living on the island for you? How did it go?
It was great. I mean, understanding and learning about life on Pender Island, I had to spend a full year. I had to do a full cycle of understanding what it was like running a restaurant on Pender Island, in terms of things breaking down, contacts, commitments, reliability from people, understanding that there isn't just a multitude of electricians or plumbers or guys that can help you. You really have to build and nurture relationships with people, and you have to put a lot of trust in people, and you have to be reliable. And running a marina, again, it's learning a whole new clientele base, learning which side is port and starboard and with bow and stern, and why people like to tie up their boats certain ways. There's lots of key people that I can remember that I spent a lot of time listening to and learning from. People that had been on Pender Island for 30, 40 years, or had been coming to the marina for 30, 40 years. They were an in-depth wealth of knowledge in terms of understanding and learning what island life is about.
You mean just like having conversations at the bar with people and just
I would really, I'm a big fan of whenever I'm going to make a decision on something, I always talk to the people who actually know what they're talking about, as opposed to just going ahead and saying, okay, this is how we're going to do things. You can't just, if you get a delivery and you're missing 6 items on the delivery, well, like I was saying before about living on an island, you're literally on an island. You can't just quickly run to the store and get some prime rib and go and get this and go and get that to fill the gap of what just got delivered. You've got to figure things out on the fly because you're on an island basically. And so anyway, the learning curve of living here was, it was pretty steep. You know, it was understanding the community, and there was a lot of, when you're making decisions at a pub like that or a restaurant like that, even with my restaurant that I have now, I sort of put my fingers on the pulse of the community and tried to figure out what they like. Instead of doing the things that I thought people should eat or doing the things that I thought people should have, I decided this with all my businesses over the years or places that I ran, it's why not do the things that people want to have as opposed to trying to force them to have something that you think they should have. And, it seemed to work. And, I try to be as friendly as I can with people and try to be as kind as I can with people and patient as I can with people. And seems to have worked out so far.
Yeah.
I remember my first experience going to the disc park. I remember I used to walk my dog at the disc park with my wife and our brand new baby. And there was these funny baskets in various parts of this park. And I remember thinking to myself a few things like, boy, they sure have funny looking recycle bins on these islands. Or I would think that they were spots where people would leave hay and the deer would come and eat hay.
That makes sense for sure.
Yeah,
definitely.
But the recycle thing didn't really, I couldn't figure out why or how people would leave cans in these things. Why wouldn't they just put a bottom on these baskets? And so, but as time went by, I realized there was this game that people love to play, and that's disc golf. And I think back to those thoughts that I had now and how ridiculous my thoughts were.
It's funny, actually, I just did an interview with Ben McConkey a couple episodes ago, and we talked about disc golf. And after I finished the episode, I thought to myself, guaranteed there's people who are going to hear that have no idea what disc golf is or whatever. But what Joe's describing is that a disc golf basket stands about 3 feet up on a post, and there's a basket, and there's some chains, and there's a top to it. And anyway, you're supposed to throw it into the basket, and you throw a disc, meaning a frisbee, except they're not frisbees. That's a big faux pas in the disc golf world. Yes. But and it's a beloved game on our island here.
In the last few years, I've picked up the game. I found myself a disc bag and discs, and what started out as a bit of a recreational hobby and has turned itself into, I'm a bit of an addict now. I love it. I've been to the south of England and played disc golf. I've been all over Vancouver Island. I make friends with people on Facebook, and I go meet them for rounds of disc golf. And I have a friend of mine in Germany. He's dying for me to come over and play disc golf in Germany, but they're pretty big courses, and you got to have pretty big arms. But so it's just one of those things about learning what life is like on Pender Island. There's this whole other. I remember the first time I heard people say that they're going to church on Sunday. I always was thinking they were going to the Anglican church, but really it's a group of people that meet on Sunday to go play disc golf, and it's called going to church. It was years before I understood what they were talking about.
Yeah, it's called Sunday church. It's been called that for years. That's it's the Church of Disc Golf. It's at the cathedral, at the park. Yeah, definitely. Well, so there was a bit of an adjustment period to being on Pender. Yeah. But, actually, you mentioned your wife a few occasions, and I'm curious, how did you and your wife, Alex, meet?
I worked at a pub in Brentwood Bay I worked in Brentwood Bay for almost 17 years. And in 2005, the pub that I was working at had just been purchased by a new ownership group. We were doing a bit of recruiting, and I was running out the door of the pub to go do some banking in summer of 2005. And this young lady came in with a resume, said she wanted to apply for a job. So I recognized her last name because I went to school with some of her cousins. I hired her. Alex worked a day a week in our beer and wine store. And I don't know what I said or what I did or anything like that. Somehow we just started hanging out. Certainly at that point in my life wasn't, the thought of meeting someone and getting involved with somebody was not on my list of things to do. But somehow I just met this girl working at the pub I was working at, and we just started hanging out. And the next thing you know, we were making plans to move to Europe and go work in a pub in Europe. So
how quickly did that happen after you met the trip to Europe?
So we met in 2005, this summer, strictly as a job interview. I think at the Christmas party that year, we danced and I walked her home. And I think my pinky touched her pinky for a moment. And I think one of her girlfriends said something like, "She loves you," or "You love her, you want to marry her." You're just sort of strangely foreshadowing what actually was going to happen in the next year. So we ended up started dating in about March of 2006. So about 8 or 9 months after she applied for the job at the restaurant. And then we moved to England in the end of 2007. We spent most of 2008 there. So about almost 2 years after we initially met, we ended up moving to England. We went through some really tough times over there. We worked for some pretty tough people. We made some bad choices in terms of employers. And while we were in England going through some really, really hard times, it suddenly dawned on me that if this person is willing to endure this type of hard time with me, then we should get married.
Right on.
And we walked to the top of a hill in the Lake District in Kendal. And I asked her to marry me. She was obviously taken off guard, but she said yes. I was pretty happy. She said yes. That moment there, all of a sudden, now we are really a couple. And it wasn't that long after that we moved back to Canada, found out we were pregnant, and found our way to Pender Island. I looked at other jobs and I looked at other opportunities. Since being on Pender Island, actually, I've had job opportunities and opportunities to go work in different parts of the world and different parts of BC. But it would have to be a pretty major offer and opportunity for me to say, okay, let's pack it in on Pender Island and let's go do. For starters, our son, who is 8.5 now, it's amazing how much of a say a 3, 4, 7, 8-year-old kid has in what you do in your life. And he loves it here. And I can't imagine ever prying him away from Pender Island to say, hey, do you want to move to Scotland or Spain or something? Because it would seem like fun in the beginning, but really this is his home. And I think this is where he wants to grow up. And that initially was the reason why we came to Pender Island, is we wanted to raise our son. It's not that we didn't want to raise our son in Victoria. Victoria is nice. But we heard correctly, that raising a child on Pender Island is pretty cool. And from those people that told us that, they're right.
Well, from the parent perspective, because I'm not a parent myself, but I've heard this from a lot of parents that it's a great place to raise kids. Can you put some words as to why it is such a great place to raise children?
Oh, boy. That whole batch of kids that were born right around the same time Henry was, the same year, the year after, it seemed like they literally grow up together, all the friends that they have, from hiking and mushroom hunting to going out to the disc park, kayaking. When Henry was in grade 1 or kindergarten, one of the 2 years, was when I was offered a job somewhere else. And I remember specifically thinking to myself, I don't even know if these people at the school are good educators yet. I just know that they're really nice, wonderful people, and I can't imagine pulling him away. I think he was in kindergarten, actually. And I can't imagine raising him or taking him anywhere else. We can go to the grocery store, and from the meat department to the produce to the checkout, everyone's, "Hi, Henry, how you doing?" Not just with Henry, though, but with all the kids. They're always happy to see all the kids. And everyone's so courteous and friendly and kind and giving. And, Henry's got such a supporting network of people here that he doesn't even know about. So many people on the island know Henry that, I think he's probably more well-known on the island than I am. I have a restaurant, but everyone knows who Henry is. And I'm just his dad that has a restaurant,
Well, maybe we'll just touch on topic for a little bit, why everybody knows Henry, because there was a specific incident that happened in the past that I'm sure you'd want to talk about a little bit now. So,
yeah. If anything, I mean, of all the reasons, I wanted to talk about why we came to Pender Island, I guess as time goes by, and if there's people on Pender Island that sit down and listen to this podcast, it's the beginning ability for me to say thank you to everyone on Pender Island for what happened in 2011. It was August of 2011, specific date, 12th or 13th, somewhere in there. My wife was in Calgary attending a wedding. Henry had been not feeling well. He was sick. He sort of really wasn't walking. He sort of toppled over a few times. And my in-laws were here visiting, and something just didn't seem right. There was something off with Henry. You know how you just know your own kid better than anyone. And it was a Sunday night or Sunday afternoon, and they said, "Do you mind if we take Henry to see the doctor in Victoria?" It was the third week of August. There was 1 million people at the pub. The campground was packed. The marina was packed. I knew I had this sinking feeling in my tummy that something just wasn't right. And so they took him to Sidney to go to the doctor. And I continued about the day knowing I was distracted. I talked to some of the staff and they said, "How you doing?" I said, something just doesn't feel right. About 11:30 that night, I got a call. I was in my office. I don't know why, how I didn't know. I just knew something wasn't right. And I sort of had a moment in my office where I was not crying, but on the verge of tears because I just had an uneasy feeling. And I got a call on my cell phone from the Victoria General Hospital. And it was a lady on the phone, and she said, Hi, Mr. Down. My name is, I can't remember the lady's name. She says, "I'm very sorry to say, but your son Henry has cancer." And there's a multitude of 1 million things that go through your mind. I could hear some crying in the background. I could tell the lady on the phone, who was a nurse, a medical professional, was herself having a hard time keeping herself together. She was upset. And, on Pender Island at 11:30 on a Sunday night in the middle of the summertime, there is no exit strategy. There is no quickly running to the ferry or getting a helicopter or a boat or anything like that. You're basically trapped. I'd only been at the pub I'd been at the marina for a couple of years, but I hadn't really trained anyone in the back office yet. But I knew that I had to get off island and I had to go be with my family. There was a 7:05 ferry in the morning, so between 11:30 at night to 7 in the morning, I had to train someone how to open the safe. I had to train someone how to do payroll. I had to train someone how to do the daily cash. I had to get my affairs in order, find someone to look after a dog, and get that 7:05 ferry to Vancouver to go be with my family. I managed to get the 7:05 ferry. I showed one of the staff how to open the safe. I walked them through things that needed to be done that week and sort of handed the reins of the property over to a couple of the staff members. It's a long 2.5 hour ferry ride to Vancouver when you need to get to the hospital. I got off the ferry. I got into a taxi, burst into tears in the taxi. Taxi driver asked me if I was okay, and I explained to him what was happening, and he put some like rosary beads around my neck. It was really a touching moment. I was driving to the Children's Hospital with a gentleman I had never met before in a taxi, and I was in tears. He was in tears, and he was praying. He was praying in a language I didn't understand. So he could have been Hebrew, could have been Moroccan, could have been any language. But he was praying and praying, and he kept saying the same things over and over and over. And he put more beads around my neck. Didn't charge me for the taxi ride. Gave me a hug, and then I went into the hospital.
Wow.
my wife had sort of got an emergency flight, I guess, from Calgary. And, I went to go see my little boy who was in terrific, terrific pain. And you don't know anything. You don't know. Cancer is a word, but there's so many multitudes and facets and diseases and strains and types. And the not knowing is the scariest part of it all, not knowing anything about what's going on. So once we got to sit down with the oncologist and the nurses, and they sort of talked about what their thoughts were and the treatment path, that there was a little bit more of a comfort level. One of the first things they said to us was, your son's been diagnosed with cancer. That by all means is not a death sentence, just so you know. Which was comforting to hear. And as time went by and we learned more and Alex learned more, my wife was, because I had to go back and run the property, my wife stayed in the hospital with Henry. But once you start to learn and understand a little bit more, and you understand what the medicines are, and you understand sort of the procedures, you're still terrified, but at least the ignorance of not knowing anything at all sort of was worn away. So that was in August. And September 11th, 2011, there was a day organized at Port Browning called I Love Henry Day. The community got together. There was a silent auction. There was bands playing all day. Some of my staff, Lindsay Hampson, who worked for me at the time, she'd organized a large part of the day I Love Henry Day. I can absolutely, honestly say without hesitation that day financially it saved us. Between going back and forth, and the people I work for, they said take as much time as you need, or just go. We'll figure things out. But from transportation to accommodation to meals to the going back and forth, it costs a lot of money. Unfortunately, the world of medicine and all that stuff, one of the parents can stay, but oftentimes the other parent has to go to Ronald McDonald House or Easter Seals or something. So from a charity baseball game that weekend to the I Love Henry Day, so there was a day in Sidney called Hot Dogs for Henry. The entire community, it seemed like, was at Port Browning Marina that day, bidding on items and putting things up for auction. And there was a little special dance done for Henry that day by a lady in the community. It was a whole day of bursting into tears over and over and over again. So, there was certain reasons that brought us to Pender Island. There's a little bit of me that kind of like sneakily feels that we were meant to come to Pender Island because of some trials and tribulations we might face going down the road, and what an amazing place to be, what a great place to be when you're in trouble. And the old saying, it takes a community to raise a child. Well, I can tell you that is a never been truer statement than what I experienced on September 11th, 2011. It was just the showing of support and love was like nothing I've seen before. So, yeah, I'm touched and humbled and thankful. We don't even know, even to this day. My wife and I, there was so many intricate details put into that day that we don't even know about. There's people that donated and did things for us that we don't even know. We'll never meet. One gentleman, he donated 22 float plane flights back and forth to Vancouver. He says, Joe, I don't want to give you money. I don't want to donate something monetary. What I want to do is give you the opportunity to have more time with your family. So this is, I've been successful in business. I lost a child when I was young. So I want to give you these float plane flights. So my wife never knew who he was until our second season at Joe's place. And it was this season. I said to my wife, do you remember those float plane flights I had? And I was able to get back and forth and spend more time with you. Well, that gentleman sitting at table 5 right now, he's the guy that donated the flights. And as she approached the table, she started to get emotional and started to get upset. I said to her, don't talk to him now. Jeez, the restaurant's packed and you're bursting into tears. Keep your act together. talked to him afterwards. So the day, luckily it was at the end of the day. So the day was just winding down. And then she went over to him and said, I understand you donated some flights. And then the two of them burst into tears. And then the kids broke into tears. And then there was this blubbering mess of crying people in the restaurant at the end of the day. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was an emotional time. It was, we still deal with it. I mean, we still go to, Children's Hospital, or we're able to go to the oncology clinic in Victoria. Henry still has to go for blood tests. It's been 7 years now, but it'll be something that needs to be monitored the rest of his life. They'll want to track him, make sure that if there's any markers in his blood, he's out of the woods, like he's fine. But every time he scrapes his knee or every time he has an upset tummy, you can't help but let your mind wander to, what could this be? Yeah, so what brought us to Pender Island? Was it I think it's just a fate, I guess. Like what a spot to be in when you're going through the worst time of your life. It's great.
For sure. And this was something that happened 7 years ago, and it seems like it's going to stick with you for the rest of your life. Clearly, just being here in the room with you, listening to you tell the story.
Yeah. It's fresh. It's still fresh, Not last Christmas, but the Christmas before, Henry had some growing pains like kids have. He woke up and one of his legs was feeling a bit sore, and he was having a little bit of trouble putting weight on one of his legs, which was the beginning, initial first sign that there was an issue with him. When Henry was, when he was first diagnosed, one of the things that happened was this really large tumor that was growing at the base of his spine started to lean on the nerves and the nerve endings with one of his legs. And every time he went to walk, his leg would collapse. He had to learn how to walk all over again. He had to learn how to use once he'd gone through the recovery and treatment and surgeries and chemotherapy. Once he'd done all that, he had to learn how to use his legs again. So he had to learn how to walk twice.
Wow. Which
is weird because he really likes to run. And I always oftentimes attribute that to, I wonder if he remembers back about not being able to walk, and that's why he likes to run everywhere. So,
kids like to run. Yeah. Running's fun.
It is.
Yeah. Well, the second traditional question we always get to on this podcast is who's helped you along the way, but it seems like that's been answered without asking. Maybe just to tie off that section there, any particular last thoughts on that in terms of other than the huge community support that came with that event, and anybody in particular you'd like to highlight or anything?
I almost find it to be almost. I find that I would be almost leaning on the unfair level if I was to pinpoint anyone in particular. Over the years since we've been here, so many different families, so many different people, so many different casual acquaintances, people you don't expect, have helped us out along the way. Even just to our, from the house we live in to, getting the restaurant up and running. There's so many characters and individuals that have put their faith in us and believed in us and said, okay, let's help these guys out. And so, anyone in particular, I think in particular, it's the people of Pender Island. From supporting the restaurant to be able to have a restaurant open 7 days a week, any business open 7 days a week on Pender Island is tough. But to be able to have a breakfast and lunch place open 7 days a week all year long is a testament to the support and that the people of Pender Island give us. So.
Gratitude for the people of Pender Island.
Yeah. We like to feed people. Sometimes we get a little carried away with some of the crazy ideas that we have, but it's a lot of fun being creative. And now we're at a point where, the restaurant's doing well and we're plugging along in the right direction, but I'd love to get my hands on another project. Everyone knows that I've been saying that for a long time, but I know the people of Pender Island have really great appetites and I really want to do something else for them. So it's just a matter of finding the right place.
All right.
Yeah.
When you came here earlier today, we had a little chat beforehand, and the topic of basketball came up, which I thought was kind of interesting, yeah. And it really tickled my curiosity. So I'm just going to ask you a little bit about basketball because it seems like that was a passion of yours when you were growing up.
Yeah, when I grew up, I was a pretty good ball player. I started playing basketball when I was 9. I was in grade 4 at Sidney Elementary, and when I was at grade 5 at Greenglade School in Sidney, when I was in grade 4 and 5, I was playing basketball on the grade 6 team at North Saanich. And my best friend and I played basketball together all the way through high school. I would have loved to have gone to college or something like that, but who knows whether I was that good or not. But I got to play in men's leagues. I got a chance to play basketball all through in Beijing and Shanghai and the Shandong province in China. It's such a love and passion. I'm really passionate about sports as a whole. If you come in the restaurant, you'll see my heroes sort of hanging on the wall, and the Wi-Fi password is Celtics33 because I'm a big Celtics fan. But it's weird now because I'm a little older and I feel like I'm shorter and rounder than I was, and it's hard for people to imagine me running up and down a basketball court and shooting the ball. But that's my first love by far. I love the sport of basketball. When I was in school, I had just had a voracious appetite for basketball stats, and that slowly started to carry over into baseball and hockey and then all professional sports. And I really wanted to get into sports broadcasting. I wanted to take that knowledge of sports and love of sports on to the next level. And I did everything I could to get behind a microphone. I used to play canned music for weddings and stuff like that. I know nothing about music. And the guy that I used to play canned music for, he would say, if you're not sure who the artist is or you don't know who does the song, just play Margaritaville because everyone loves Margaritaville, right? So
you'll always get somebody to come out to dance to Margaritaville.
So because I didn't know very much about music, I used to play Margaritaville 10 times a night because people would ask me for songs I've never heard of before. So it was the same songs over and over. So, and I worked as a bingo caller for 5.5 years. I used to sit on a microphone a lot like this one. And I would call bingo numbers from 10 in the morning until 1 in the morning for, 13 hours straight to be on a microphone.
What? Seriously? Yeah. 13 hours?
Yeah, I used to love it. You got $1 a game, and I would call 90 games a day. That's how long it would take.
So wait, was this in Sidney or?
That was in Sidney, where the Star Cinema is now, right beside the Good Fortune restaurant. The Star Cinema used to be a bingo hall. I believe it was a bowling alley before that. In 1986, it opened as the Saanich Peninsula Community Bingo Association. And that's where I got involved in hospitality to begin with. I started flipping burgers in the little cafe there. I used to call bingo numbers in the daytime and flip burgers at nighttime there. And when I turned 19 and transitioned into the bar business, I was sort of offered a job in a bar. I realized that the people who were playing bingo in the daytime were the same people that were coming to the pub at nighttime. It was just, they just talk differently at nighttime after a few drinks.
Okay, a little more slow. Can I get a bingo call from you right now? Can we hear a bingo call?
A bingo call. What was my favorite number? 066 was my number. I used to go like this. I used to go under the 066. People used to go crazy. They're like, why do you do that? I'm like, it's just something I do.
66.
Yeah, because in bingo, there's 2 little ducks and a stick and an egg, and top of the house and bottom of the house. Every number has a call sign to it, right? So I never did that. I was strictly to the numbers, except for 066. I used to. So as the years went by, I always used to extend it out longer and longer and longer, and because I knew it annoyed some people. So
your way of having fun.
Yeah. Well, there was one particular lady that used to sit in the front row all the time, and she used to shake her bingo dabber at me every time I did it. So
yeah, I bet you loved it, eh? It's like, oh, she's shaking her dabber at me again. I got her. Right on. Wow, 5.5 years. That trips me out, though. Seriously, that's like 13-hour days.
It's because there's always a little bit of break between games, so you can go and get a coffee or a water. And if it was one of the bigger games where we do $1,000 prize, or we were giving away a microwave oven or a fridge full of stuff, people would always buy extra cards. So you'd have 7-8 minutes between games sometimes to go and get a coffee or go to the bathroom. Or you have 386 people used to fit in there, and all of them were looking at you talking on a microphone. And I liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. When I was in high school, my parents moved to Vancouver. My last year and a half of high school, I basically was renting a room. And I needed to find a job. So I was sort of working and going to school, high school, and trying to figure things out on the fly. The bingo hall was, I met some great friends there. In fact, the lady that wrote me the letter to come to Pender Island, that's how I met her. She was a regular at the bingo hall.
Oh, really? Okay.
Georgina. Yeah, she used to come in all the time. She used to play bingo. And then, we became friends, and she followed my hospitality career. And so, I mean, in some sense, you can attribute me landing on Pender Island to my years as a bingo caller. That's all meshes together.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny when you start looking back at the connections of your life, and then just you see how precarious it is, like how we wound up, or is it fate? I don't know. But just get back to basketball, because you told an interesting story earlier about what you and some friends did after you finished high school.
Oh, yeah, right. So my very good friend of mine, Darren, who lives in Phoenix, Arizona, and we grew up together on the Sandwich Peninsula. When we graduated high school, we jumped in his little Dodge Power Wagon truck, and we drove down to the States, and we went to all the capital cities, or all of the really good cities in all the Western states, and played a pickup game of basketball. I played in a 3-on-3 basketball tournament in the parking lot of Circus in Las Vegas when I was 17 years old. And we just went out, and all we did was we drove around the city, and we went and met guys and just played basketball. Because in those days, there was no iPads or cell phones or anything like that. You had to go and look around and try to find games. We were just a couple of Canadian guys we thought we were really good at basketball. We were okay, but we played a different style of basketball. We played in Salt Lake City, we played in Boise, Idaho, we played in Phoenix, Vegas, San Diego, San Francisco, Anaheim, Billings, Montana. We went to the Grand Canyon, and then when we drove back, we finally got across the border back to Canada. When we said goodbye to each other, my good friend was going down to try to get involved in a police academy in Los Angeles. And it was one of those touching goodbye moments. We did this epic basketball trip, got back, spent a day together going to Denny's and doing what we did. And then we said our goodbyes, and he went on to be a homicide detective, which is amazing. And he just retired after 25 years of being a homicide detective. And I'm trying to get him to come to Pender Island to visit Pender Island, but it's probably not his pace. He's more of a big city kind of guy.
Yeah, most people enjoy being here for at least a few days, but who knows? It might turn into his pace. I just think that's so cool, to just pick up and go on a road trip, and not just go on a road trip and drive around and look around at the sites, but to go look for some competitive basketball games to play in, and then just drive around looking for courts and seeing people playing and doing that at such a young age. And I guess part of it was testing your mettle against different people in different cities. That's so cool.
You're exactly right. And in some regards now, basketball is kind of a young man's game now, and it really breaks my knees. And now that I've discovered disc golf, now I take my disc bag and I'll go to disc parks wherever. And if I see people playing, I'll say, hey, can I pair up with you guys? And it's such a social sport, as is basketball. I got to meet some great guys, great players. I played pickup games. I've never met Steve Nash. He would never say, oh, I know Joe from Pender. But I did get to play with him once in a pickup game in Victoria. I mean, I could have played against people that actually had gone on to do things, but I would never have known. But I did know Steve because he was a couple of years behind me, and I recognized him. And he was still at SMU then. And I remember thinking, he's such a hot dog. He's
was he really?
Yeah, he's trying to dribble between his legs and go around the back, and he's using his left hand. It's nobody dribbles with their left hand. It's the 80s, right? So, and I remember talking to my buddy, this guy's a hot dog. Just force him left. He can't go left. And he could go left. He did very well going left. So we just sort of zipped it from there. And I don't want to say he schooled us, but he definitely was a lot better than us. At the end, he was 3 years younger than us. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, he was 3 years younger. So
yeah, he did go on to be an NBA Hall of Famer. I think he's in the Hall of Fame, or he's probably going to be. He was
MVP twice, and I believe he's going to be inducted in the Hall of Fame. But definitely MVP twice. I watched him play twice at my high school because when I used to go back and watch the boys play all the time and basketball. And the very first game I saw him play, all the years I played high school basketball, I never once saw a dunk school. Nobody dunked back then. Layups or finger rolls or something like that, or jump shots. And the first 2 baskets I saw in that game were him feeding the ball to a guy and dunking it. And I remember, again, thinking, that guy's a hot dog.
Nobody dunks. My gosh.
Who does he think he is kind of thing? But he, like, if I close my eyes, I can still remember him running up our court at my old Parkland High School and, trying to look cool because I still wore my high school jacket then and trying to look cool. And if I was still playing, I could show you what to do. But no, he was pretty good.
Well, that road trip that you took, any particular story that stands out from that journey that you took with your buddy there?
One particular one, it was we were playing in San Diego. We were at a gymnasium. It was near Oceanside. Is where we were playing in Oceanside. We were playing in a gym, and I had just bought the ball down the court. And I passed off to a guy. Ball came back to me, and then I passed to another guy. And something happened, and we were back on the bench sitting. And this guy says to me, "You're not from around here, are you?" And I said, No, I'm not. He says, "You from Canada?" I said, "Yeah, actually, we just drove down from Canada." Is it the way? I said, "Can you tell by my accent?" He's like, "No, I can tell by the way you play." He says, "Nobody passes the ball down here. You're supposed to just." Everyone who gets the ball just shoots it, and they're all about scoring. He says, all you and your buddy do is pass the ball.
That's funny.
I know, and I realized, like, as I watched the games, like, the guys would bring the ball down the court, and they just fire it up there and just try to score. And here we were bringing the ball down the court, looking to set screens, pass the ball, make a play, because that's how we were taught how to play. And he was a big guy. He's probably 6'5", and he said to me, "You're not from around here because I can tell because you're passing the ball. Nobody passes the ball." And all of a sudden, and I remember that game specifically, that the game didn't all of a sudden turn into a big passing game, but we started to get the advantage of the game because people were giving the ball up a little bit more and they were looking for their other players. So we just play a little bit more. He called it old school. He said, "You guys play old school."
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Usually just take the ball right to the hoop.
Yeah,
you don't pass to the other guy on the team. You need the glory. Yeah. Or was that what it was? Because it was just playing like some pickup games?
Just a pickup game. There was no stats. There was no glory. There was no league standings or anything like that. It was just you want to score because you want to look good, but the thought of making a great pass so a guy can make a great shot wasn't really a thing, right?
Funny.
So I guess we play old school. So
that story, when you mentioned that earlier today, really stood out to me as a really cool thing. But we're nearing the end of our time here pretty quick. Any other travel stories that you want to share? Because it seems like you've done a lot of traveling.
When Henry went through his treatment and chemotherapy and surgery, and when he was 3, when I was asked if I would re-sign my contract with Port Browning Marina, I said yes, but I want to go spend some time with my family. So when Henry was 3, we took him to Europe for 6 weeks. He got to go to the top of the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe. He saw Big Ben. He's been to the top of Prague Castle. He's sailed across Lake Geneva. He's been on a train through the Alps and hiked up to castles. And he's been to the top of the Empire State Building. He's been to the MGM Grand and looked at the lines. He's had done a fair amount of traveling, and for a little guy. And in fact, just before I came down here today, I was emailing a guy because we have this, when the travel bug hits you, it hits you. And you just want to go and do something. I'm slowly putting together the idea of maybe my wife really wants to go back to Vietnam and Thailand. I'm more of a going to Norway and Iceland type traveler. So I'm trying to figure out a way to incorporate the 2 trips.
Okay. They're pretty far apart.
Yeah, they are pretty far apart. So, but I've been emailing and chatting with a guy who organizes these types of adventures for contrasting travel personalities. And so, but I mean, we've traveled a little bit. We did that European trip with Henry, and it was great to spend 6 weeks with my family and just delve all my time into them. And of course, we got to travel all around England and Scotland when we lived and worked over there. We worked in some great areas, not great pubs. Saw a lot of it. And I went to the Orkneys a little while ago and way up and traveled around the Orkney Islands and met another guy up there. Last year, I went to Scotland and the south of England and met people and played disc golf over there in Wales and played some courses that are humbling as heck. Boy, oh boy.
Windy and long.
Windy. And if for those of you who don't know what disc is all about, when I say I have understable discs, when I throw them, they basically take a nosedive and hit the ground because the wind just grabs them and tosses them to one side. So you got to have a pretty big, powerful arm over there. And, the course we have on Pender Island is you can putt your way around the course. It's pretty small. When I went over there and I have my disc bag and I've got lots of aces, holes in ones. I'm playing with these guys that are really big throwers and they look at my discs and they're like, wow, you must be really good. You got so many aces and you... And then I get to the course and their holes are miles away. And I'm like, no, we have a pretty small course.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got some aces, but I don't anticipate getting any aces over there. When you play on those big courses with those guys, their discs are shiny and polished and beautiful and they look fantastic. And when you take a tree bashing disc like I have over there, it's just a bruised, scraped up piece of plastic that you try to use as a disc.
All right. Well, we're pretty much near the end of our time here, but I just want to, just send it back your way and see if there's anything that you want to end off and any final words you want to add to this interview.
Mostly, I just want to, thank you for the opportunity to come and chat. And secondly, I said it at the beginning of my chatting about Pender Island was that thank you to Pender Island for embracing us and me and my wife and my son and you guys have really wrapped your arms around us on several occasions and we've had some pretty emotional times and I can't think of a better place to live.
Awesome, Joe. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
All right. Well, to honor that interview, I decided I would come down to Boatnook. So Boatnook is a little ocean access point. It's located on the North Island, just off of Schooner Way. There's a single car parking spot, and you walk down a path that's probably about 50 meters long, and it comes out into this tiny little bay. I don't even know if you can call it a bay. I guess it's called a nook, Boatnook. Anyway, so there's a park bench here. There's a dedication on the bench. It says Derek and Jenny, 2013. And we're facing towards the direction of Sidney across the water right now. You can see some BC ferries going by. And I thought this was a great place to wrap up the interview to honor Joe because every time I come down here, I find this to be a really comforting spot. And I find Joe a really comforting person to be around. So I thought it was the perfect spot. That's it for me, everybody. Until next time.